Hello everyone, I'm Charna Davis-Wiese. Welcome to UCF Profiles, the glory of the seas and the creatures who live in them. Join me in welcoming Dr. Graham Worthy, whose worldwide research will help us understand and perhaps even save these creatures. Thanks for joining us. I don't know where to start because that's also interesting and it's all over the place. So we might as well start with, I guess, our most local creature, the manatee.
Yeah.
When you show me the pictures of them, it's hard to believe that a sailor ever thought that those were mermaids.
I guess spend 6 months at sea and almost anything looks
And they
good.
are beautiful in their own way.
Certainly.
Practically the gist of all of your research is really figuring out what's best for these animals to eat, right? And how they survive and how they can adapt to their environment and their food.
Well, one way of describing it that I've used in the past is how animals make a living in the real world. And so really what we're looking at is how do animals find the food they need? How do they get enough of that? How do they process that within their body to maximize their use? And then ultimately, what are all the costs they have to deal with? So it's, in a sense, it's almost an accounting system. We have to balance what goes in and what goes out and make sure everything works.
And with the technology you have, you can do things now that you couldn't do a very short time ago.
Definitely. We can get a lot better insight into them through technology, as you say, or through different methodologies that have been developed, where we can assess essentially the "you are what you eat" idea. And by taking small samples of either skin or fat, we can really get a lot of information about where they've spent their time and what they've been eating.
You know, manatees, ever since we were little children, our little children now, there was always an education here in Florida about protecting them. And mostly the promotion has been on propeller accidents, that kind of thing. But that's not the only problem facing them.
No, there's a lot of issues. Habitat degradation. Our seagrass communities along the coasts have changed drastically over the last 50 years. And historically, that was a major food source for them. There's a significant issue even with neonatal mortality, the period of time right after the calf is born. And we really have almost no understanding of what goes on with their lives at that period of time. So there's a lot of questions, a lot of issues which we really have very limited understanding of, really some very basic questions in some ways. We've spent most of our time counting them, seeing where they are and determining where the key habitat areas are, and clearly very valuable work, but there's still a lot of basic questions that we still need to resolve.
Being herbivores, they really need warmth, and is that why they tend to focus their attention when it gets colder? Do they go around power plants and things like that? They're looking for warmer water?
Yeah. One thing we have to remember where we live here in Florida, we're at the northern edge of their range. The manatees that we associate with our coastal waters live through the Caribbean. They live all along the coast of South and Central America. They're tropical animal. And the areas that they live in here are very dependent, where they can live at least, is very dependent on temperature.
What's your initial research showing you?
Well, a lot of what we're looking at right now is trying to determine specific needs in terms of energy requirements, what they're feeding on specifically. We're trying to determine, and this is a tough one, we're trying to determine from the manatee's perspective what makes a good, you brought up the issue of warm water, what makes a good warm water site? Because they do use things like power plants, and clearly if you look down the road, those power plants aren't going to be operational forever. And so what in a sense has been set up here is a system where these manatees are depending on an artificial warm water source which has a finite life. Historically, they used other sites, but for a variety of reasons, those sites may not be available to them or may not be as attractive to them. So we need to find out what makes a site attractive. And so to do that, we really need to put ourselves in the manatee, in a sense, and see what factors they look at. So one of my doctoral students is examining that very question. It's going to be an issue not too far down the road when these power plants start going offline.
Do you think maybe they're just not going to come this far north, or is it going to affect them more severely?
Well, it could have a variety of impacts. Long term, it may mean that they don't come this far north. In the short term, there could be some serious problems. There was an artificial warm water source, a pulp and paper mill, that was shut off a few years ago up in the Georgia-Florida border that some manatees took advantage of. And a number of them, even though there was no warm water, still went to the site and essentially were waiting for the warm water. And some of them died. So there could be some immediate issues with some deaths, or there could be a redistribution. Of course, overlaying all that, global warming and climate change may adjust things further north for them anyway, so they may be okay.
Now that I ask you that, there's so much out there that it's almost hard to know as an average person what to believe. Is it cyclical? Is it something? I can't believe that we can't be causing it, some of it, because of what we've done to our Earth. But as a biologist, even in the years since you've decided, yes, I'm going to be a marine biologist to today, what have you seen? Have you seen changes? We're
seeing dramatic changes right now in South Africa. We're doing some work there looking at what dolphin species are feeding on along the South African coast. I went there for the first time about 10 years ago, and these small communities that we're working out of had a thriving fishery. Local fishermen would go out nearby, nearshore waters, and catch plenty of fish. We were out there a year or so ago. Almost all of those fishermen are gone. They've had to move somewhere else because the fish aren't there. They are seeing dramatic changes in climate, in terms of weather itself, not climate per se, but immediate weather. And they're seeing shifting of ocean currents. With those shifts in ocean currents, the fish stocks move. And so from my perspective, looking at what the marine mammals are doing, that's an immediate and very drastic change. There was an event, and regardless of what caused these things, from a biological perspective, I'm interested in how the animals cope with whatever's happening. There was a major regime shift in the North Pacific in the mid to late 70s. These things occur, but the result of it was that the prey species, the fish, changed. The distribution of them changed, the numbers of them changed. And since that time, we've had tremendous crashes in the population size of stellar sea lions. There's impacts on a whole variety of species. Sea otters, killer whales, the whole system has changed. And so I think we're going to have to get used to seeing some of those kinds of very dramatic shifts.
It's going to sound like it's a cliche, and I'm almost afraid to say it because it sounds like a cliche, but there are many people worried about this, and many people want to do something about it. What can the average person do? Anything? Vote? Recycle?
All those things help, and it's a cumulative thing.
Like the 100th monkey theory.
Yeah, but it's not going to be a simple change, and my guess is that we're going down a path that's going to be very difficult for us to change in our lifetimes. I think ahead to my daughter. She's 2. What is the world going to look like when she's my age? And I'm not going to mention what that is.
Little things when you mention, I won't either. So we'll do that for each other. When you mention that, my little boy had said to me, we have this house that has one of those retention type pond lake things in the back. And when he was very little, we had frogs like you wouldn't believe. And at night it was a cacophony that when we first bought the house, we really had to get used to going to sleep with everything singing out there. And the toads are gone.
Right.
Maybe we see one. We used to, I remember it was a joke in our family because my sister said, you have to get a blow-up alligator because they all end up in the pool and we have to save them. The alligator will scare them away from the pool. So we have a picture of this blow-up alligator with like 9 toads sitting on top of it. But they're gone.
Right.
That's in our own little ecology. Something has made them go.
There are a lot of things changing, and many of them we have no idea. And we will only know once we get to some dramatic change, some regime change.
With the dolphins, you've also shown me these packs that you put on them. Tell us about that.
These are called track packs. One of my doctoral students, Steve Shippey, was involved in actually developing these. They're a neat system because they're taking advantage of very recently developed technology. They stay on the animals for a very short period of time. It's basically suction cupped with a little piece of Velcro, so it just falls off and it floats and you go and retrieve it.
Depending on how smart and strong the dolphin is,
yeah, they stay on for varying periods, sometimes measured in minutes, sometimes measured in days, but they're short term. But what it allows us to do is to get some very detailed information as to what that animal is doing. It's the same kind of thing as I said before with the manatees. In all of these cases, we have to try and put ourselves in the animal's position and see how they experience the world to really understand what their limits are. And we can do that with technology like the track pack, where there's a little temperature pill that goes into their stomach, so when they eat a fish, which is a different temperature than their body, that registers as a little drop in temperature. That tells us they've been eating. It gives us information on swimming speeds, water temperatures, all those kinds of things. More elaborate ones can give you GPS locations. They can give you depths of their dives, time they spend down at the bottom. Some of them even have small camera systems incorporated into them where you can actually really see what the animal is seeing. Those give us tremendous insights into the lives of these animals, which a few years ago we couldn't even have conceived of.
What's the biggest misconception about dolphins?
Flipper.
Sweet.
Sweet, friendly. They can be. They're they're a very intelligent animal, and they definitely have their own personalities. And like people, some of them they don't mind you interacting with. Some of them don't want to go near you. They're like people; they'll take advantage of a free meal. People like to try and feed them off their boat or off a dock. It's not a good idea.
They're big, powerful.
They're very
creatures.
Powerful. You see these dolphins swimming around, and I don't think people really realize that the dolphin you see swimming around here in the Indian River Lagoon, they could be weighing 500 or 600 pounds, and the majority of that weight is muscle.
Just to be able to come out of the water like they do, and,
exactly.
and flip and
try and do that yourself.
I can't even make it up a couple stairs someday.
Well, I can appreciate that too. But they're very powerful animals, and it may not even be an intentional injury. But just if they're trying to get out of the way and you happen to be in the wrong place, you can get hurt. By feeding them, you're changing their feeding habits. You're turning them into these little mooches that follow around boats and can get themselves in trouble with props.
You know, now that you bring this up, this has nothing to do with any of your research, but I do. You might have a thought on this. You know, all these increase in shark attacks and shark bites, and I remember I grew up 2 blocks from the beach. We were there all the time. You never heard of a shark bite, but I see it. Tourism economy of these shark boats where people go out and they feed them and they swim with them. Do you think it's possible to change their culture, and maybe they're not afraid of people? Maybe they associate people with food when the way they didn't before.
Oh, definitely. There's lots of places where you can go and swim with stingrays and feed them, and they attract them in. Sure. Definitely. So
we can affect them in many ways. We think we're just making them into entertainment, but we're maybe changing their lives and ours.
Sure. Oh, definitely. It's like feeding the bears at Yellowstone Park. You change their way of living, and not necessarily for the better. And we all have this vision of nature being warm, cuddly, and friendly. And nature's a rough place sometimes. And if we get ourselves into a situation where we've attracted animals in and sort of made them friendlier to us, quote unquote, it's not always going to be that way. They may
not necessarily have the same idea you do.
Precisely.
We'll be right back right after this.
Greatness doesn't care how early it is or how late. Greatness doesn't care if anyone's watching. Greatness doesn't care about your clothes, your hair, or your music. The only thing greatness cares about is getting an opportunity. Where will you get yours? At UCF, we believe no dream is too big and no goal out of reach. On the fields, the courts, and in the classrooms, UCF stands for opportunity.
The Florida Interactive Entertainment Academy. Don't just get into the gaming industry, lead it.
Hello, we're talking with Dr. Graham Worthy, who is an internationally known marine biologist, and we're talking about our sea creatures and all the things he and his people are doing to help understand them and quite possibly save them. In your dolphin research, is there anything that you found that's surprising that you did not expect?
They constantly surprise you. With some of the short-term tracking that we were talking about, they were going into areas where you would not have envisioned dolphins going, up into small freshwater creeks and things. With some of the dolphin work I'd done before coming here to UCF when I was in Texas, people generally think of bottlenose dolphins as being somewhat local. And we did some tracking of animals there, long-distance tracking, off the Galveston area, And we found animals that decided, well, we're going to go to Mexico for a few days. And literally in the course of a week or two, they would take a jaunt down to Mexico and be back in the same areas that we normally would see them. If we hadn't been tracking them, we would have just guessed, oh, they've been around, but we haven't seen them. They can travel tremendous distances. They can go places you don't expect them to go. They're constantly surprising.
And we'll never know why, really.
No, but maybe that in and of itself isn't important. It's good to know that they can, and it's important to understand that they do.
That might help save them.
Well, we have to have an understanding of what they do. And sometimes that means small scale, like looking at the Indian River Lagoon and looking at a variety of species, manatees, dolphins, turtles, to try and assess what's going on with the health of the lagoon. Or it could be on a huge scale. Some of the work we're doing in the North Pacific with humpback whales, where we're looking at whales which are feeding in off the coast of Alaska, or others that are feeding off British Columbia or California. All of these whales that are feeding in over these huge distances come together somewhere like Hawaii for breeding. For them, the whole North Pacific is their backyard. They feed in Alaska and they go to Hawaii to breed. When they're in Hawaii breeding, they're not eating.
I think I probably would too.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of Alaskans that go to Hawaii. And maybe the whales just sort of did it first. But that's the thing with marine mammals. They're not just a local species. The problems that they encounter aren't just local. Another example with the dolphins moving. We had dolphins come ashore in Texas dead. When we assessed what caused their death, we would look at their blubber for toxicology. And these animals had recently been exposed to DDT. Well, DDT is outlawed in the United States, but it's not in Mexico.
Right, they got it somewhere else.
Right. And so we were looking at dolphins that were dying in Galveston, and I'm not suggesting that the DDT killed them, but clearly they had been exposed to it at some point in their life fairly recently. They were being exposed to things which were 1,000 miles away.
And that's part of our problem with global warming, and what we're doing is the world is going to have to come together and do something about it.
Yeah.
One country can't do it.
And some countries are going to feel it a lot more than others. The South African example I used, northern and southern, extreme northern and southern latitudes are going to feel things much more than sort of more equatorial.
Because they use more energy?
No, because the change will be more drastic.
Gotcha.
Not so much that they're causing it, but the impact of the climate change. The current system's changing. Those kinds of things will be much more pronounced in those southern or very northern waters.
Let's move on to land.
Okay.
The manatees, as you told me, are herbivores now. You gave me a new word that I really love, this mega herbivore.
Yep.
So you have gotten a lot of attention for the giraffe work that you're doing here.
James Fuster's work. What we're looking at there, and this has application to a marine mammal as well, so I always try and tie things together. We were doing some work with giraffes locally here at Disney to see what they were eating. Well, clearly at Disney we have a pretty good idea of what they're eating. So this is a test project in essence to look at what they're eating and then what comes out, and I'll use the term that all the media picked up on, giraffe poop. Okay, so the poop, which is not the technical term we would necessarily use, but it works. Remnants of the plants they've consumed pass right through. And
so what you're doing is you're trying to see if this technique of analysis will work and you can go use it in the wild?
Elsewhere. Exactly. So you start with a controlled situation. So a lot of my work is captive and free-ranging. What we can do is look in the fecal material, the poop, for alkanes, and that's a particular chemical compound which is part of the cell wall of a plant. And an animal doesn't pick that up. They don't absorb it. It just passes right through. So by looking at the alkanes there, we can tell what they consumed. Well, at Disney that's not a major issue, but it is a nutritional concern for captive animals. But now we're going to start applying it to other mega herbivores. And a mega herbivore is an animal that eats plants that weighs 1,000 kilograms or more, so over 2,000 pounds. So manatees, giraffes, hippos, rhinos, elephants, they all share a common problem just because of their size as to how they process food. So we're going to start applying this method to elephants in Africa next year. We can apply it to green sea turtles here in Florida. Any of these herbivore type species and really figure out what they're eating. So
now that you've figured out how it worked in captivity, you go and let's say take the elephant poop.
Exactly.
And you can see what they're eating to maybe help elephants in captivity and feed them correctly?
It can work both ways. It gives you a better understanding of their nutritional requirements for captive animals, And it can also tell you what sorts of habitats are important for them in the wild and what you need to be protecting in the wild. We use similar kinds of techniques with dolphins and whales and sea lions and a lot of different species. Carnivores don't worry about the alkanes, but they process fatty acids. And you've heard the term, you are what you eat. Well, that's very true. The fatty acid mix of the blubber of a dolphin is representative of the fish it ate. And so we can look at all the different fish and get literally a signature for each species, look at the dolphin blubber, and by looking at the dolphin blubber and its mixture of fatty acids, I can tell you that it needed to eat 50% of this species of fish, 30% of that, 10% of this.
How did we steal you? How did we get you here to Central Florida?
This is an area that I've worked in quite a bit because I was doing manatee work. So I would come here every summer anyway. I commute back and forth from Texas. What attracted me here was essentially two pieces of a collective offer. Hub's SeaWorld Research Institute endowed my professorship at UCF, and I have a very strong working relationship with them, and in fact UCF is developing a very strong partnership with them.
Don't you have a lot of money for a big, wonderful facility in the near future?
We have dreams of a lot of money for a big, wonderful facility.
We're going to
in the
make
near
it
future.
happen. Television is the power of the media.
That would be great. There are plans for a facility on the Barrier Islands, just north of Sebastian Inlet, which would allow us to develop tremendous programs looking at the Indian River Lagoon, the near coastal systems along the Barrier Islands, but also not just from the marine perspective, but also the terrestrial perspective, looking at invasive plant species. There's a number of endangered terrestrial species that are found in this area. So that UCF Hubs partnership, I think, is going to be very, very powerful. And then the other piece of it, the attractive offer was that Gary Whitehouse, who was the provost when I came, had a program called the PREP program, the Provost's Research Enhancement Program. And so the two of those together really made a very attractive deal.
We're very lucky.
Well, I consider myself lucky, frankly. I think this has given me some tremendous opportunities. It's an amazing work environment, and working at UCF has been a pleasure.
When I was I was telling this a little earlier, when I was in high school, everybody wanted to be a marine biologist.
Right.
And maybe being from Miami, there was a lot of interest in it, and the seaquarium was really a big deal there. And so did you have a moment where you knew that this was your calling? Or have you always, did little Graham have toy dolphins?
This is the piece that always disappoints people, because growing up, no, I had no interest at all in marine mammals.
I think that's cool.
Well, I was born in England, but I grew up in Toronto, in Canada, 1,800 miles from any ocean. I hadn't seen an ocean. I entered graduate school, and I was offered a couple of projects.
And what were you studying in graduate school?
Zoology.
Okay.
But in the end, I got into environmental physiology, which led me to this. I had an offer of a project to work with harp seals off the Canadian East Coast, and that was 27 years ago.
So that was your aha.
That was my aha moment.
What was it about? What was it about the work that you knew this is for me? Because a lot of the show, some students see it, some people who are searching and looking for their passion, and I love to hear how people find theirs.
For me, I've always been a biologist. From day one, that was very clear, and there was never any question that I would get into biology. I think what really attracted me to the marine field, and marine mammals specifically, was the fact that they have so many unique adaptations to deal with unusual problems, physiological problems. And so it's hard for people to try and envision the kinds of issues that marine mammals deal with. Northern elephant seals. An adult male northern elephant seal literally does not eat for 6 months of the year. 4 months of that, he's protecting a territory to breed. So he's sitting on land, he's not eating, and he's not drinking. He doesn't drink any water, and he doesn't eat anything. Those kinds of extreme adaptations fascinate me. To be able to try and fathom how they function in that world, what their world is like, that's what really grabbed me. The environmental physiology, but the specifics of how they cope with this marine environment.
And the wonderful part about it is that may help one day, hopefully, will help save them.
Well, you protect what you understand, and you love what you understand, and we have to understand these systems before we really understand how to fix it or how to make them better.
What's so interesting to me is that the same technology and the same ideas can go from the harp seal to an elephant.
Yeah. In all those cases, you're looking at how an individual animal interacts with its environment. They're all mammals. They all have the same basic systems, same as we are. And what you're looking at is just minor tweaks or slight changes in this way or slight change that direction, which allows them to do things which we wouldn't even comprehend, we couldn't conceive of doing.
Speaking of not being able to conceive of doing this, could you imagine doing what you do with projects all over the world at once without the internet?
Oh, no, there's not a chance you could function anymore. If only to keep track, or try and keep track of all the new literature and the new results and reports that come out. It's an exponential increase in information, and you can't process it.
And to really sum it up, what are the different parts in the world where you've got everything going on?
Right now, we have humpback whales and stellar sea lions in Alaska and off the west coast of Canada. We've got dolphin and manatee projects here in Florida. We're getting involved with sea turtles here in Florida. We have dolphins in South Africa. We're going to be doing some dugong work, which is a relative of manatees, in Australia next year. We've got the elephant work we're starting in Africa. We're possibly going to be doing some things with manatees in Brazil. I think I've got most of it covered. It's a lot.
It's all over the world. If somebody's watching, maybe a younger person, and thinks, I would love to do this, what suggestions do you have?
Get involved. For people who are trying to get involved in a research program, volunteering, getting to know the professor teaching the courses that you're taking, and getting involved in their lab. That's true of anything. It's personal connections. And
you know, it's the actual lab work more than just, you know, I don't think that was around when I was in college. I remember a lot of books with very long chapters I didn't want to read. But the actual hands-on was what gives the passion to it.
It is. It really is. But to put it into perspective, you have to have done some of the book work first.
Because otherwise you don't know what you're looking at.
That's right, exactly. So it's both. And I think that's something which a lot of students don't necessarily appreciate. They see the glamour of going out and watching dolphins, but they don't realize that when you've collected those samples, you've now got 6 months of lab work to do.
You have to crawl before you walk.
Yeah. And that never stops.
Dr. Graham Worthy, thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you come back and tell us what you found out as the project grows.
Anytime.
Thank you. And thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again next time on UCF Profiles.